So this video we're going to go over the Novation Base Station 2, just the basics of the controls here. I'm going to go through all the sections and I will be jumping around. So the first setting here, we're just looking at the oscillators. The first thing you need to know is this switch right here will select oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. Whichever one you're selecting, all of these controls in the oscillator section is what will affect the oscillator that you're switched to. First off, we have coarse tuning. And then we have fine tuning. So if you press this button, it's going to cycle through the different octaves of whatever oscillator we're set to. So what I'm going to do is press a key. You can see it cycles between those. Now if you want to switch the octaves on this keyboard, you just press this or this. And it'll show what octave you're on every time you change it. I'm going to turn on oscillator 2 so we can hear it. Now here it changes the fundamental waveform of the oscillator you have selected. It cycles through that. By switching these, you can come up with a lot of different sounds with all these combinations. And then we have different settings here which will modify the pitch. So the first one here is mod envelope depth. Now what that means is you just imagine that going down to here. And here we have attack, decay, sustain, release. Now this switch, if it's set to the top, will change the amp envelope, which means it will just modify the attack, decay, sustain, release on the volume of the actual note we're playing. The mod envelope in the center will change the amount of modulation that we send this through. So it's kind of like if we want to preserve what we have set for the amp envelope and move down here to the mod envelope, we can change the envelope without changing the amp envelope. The bottom switch setting also modifies the amp and the mod envelope all in the same time. So let's go back to here. So if I bring it to the positive here, or the negative, so you can make it go in whatever direction that you want. So I'm just going to leave this on mod envelope, so we're not going to change the volume and how that's modified. So if I turn this into the positive here, we just hear the note go up because the sustain is all the way up. So let's modify these and see what happens. So as you can hear, it modifies depending on how high the amp is setting. If I bring it really down, it's going to do it quickly. And then the next we have is the decay. Now this is kind of like a down slope because we're in the positive, remember? Same thing. So when it's lower, it's faster. When it's higher, it takes longer. Now sustain is just, you would imagine that as just a line that goes after these. So that actually would just modify the pitch. And release is what we want to do after you let go of sustain. So now we can't hear anything because I have the amp envelope not to release. So I'm going to bring up release a little bit on the amp. Let's bring it down to the mod. Now we can hear the change that happens as it fades out. So let's put that in the negative, and it just inverts the envelope. Now let's go to LFO1 depth. Now we're going to look at the LFO section down here. So if I put that in the positive, it's going to use LFO1. You can see it, what rate it's on right now by how it flickers. You can obviously hear what that does. Right now we're set down to speed on this switch. If I pressed up, that changes the decay or the fade. So let's bring the speed up a little. So you can hear it fade in now. You can also change the shape. It'll cycle if you press this button. And now there's a light here. It says sync 1 and 2. Currently it's off. If we want to turn it on, we hold down function, and then we look here and we look for oscillator because we're working in the oscillator section. And then this key right here says oscillator 1, 2 sync. So if I press that down, it says off. If I turn it on, that will turn on sync. So if I press this button again, it just exits from that menu. So if we turn up oscillator 2 in the mixer section, now we're going to go over here. Pretty much they both have the same settings. So I'm going to change to oscillator 2, and I'm going to change the fine tuning just so you can hear it kind of thicken a little. For example, let's change to mod envelope depth setting. And you can hear, depending on how I have the envelope set up, now if I turn down oscillator 2, you're not going to hear that synchronized sound. If I turn oscillator 1 down and bring 2 up, I'm going to actually turn that back off. So just go back to here, turn it off, press exit. Next, we're looking at pulse width. So what I'm going to do with pulse width is we'll have to be in the square section, the square waveform on this oscillator we're on. So I'm going to go to oscillator 1, I just turned off 2, and I'm going to the pulse setting. And what you have now are 3 settings. You can set the pulse width to modulate through the envelope. You can do that in the positive and the negative. Okay, let's turn that back to 0. And next, the middle setting here is just a manual pulse width, so you can hear kind of what changes would happen if you're turning this. And if you go to the right side here, it sends it through LFO2. And again, we can use this delay setting. If I switch it in delay and turn this, it'll slowly fade into that. So I'm going to turn that down. That's immediate. Now over here, we're back at the mixer section now. So this will change the oscillator 1 and 2 volumes. So I'm going to go to oscillator 2. Let's make it like a higher octave. So you can hear oscillator 2 and 1. So down here is the sub oscillator. I'm going to turn down oscillator 2 so you can hear it better. And we can change that to 1 or 2 octaves down. And this changes the waveform. You can hear that a lot more clear. Next we have the switch. And this modifies this knob. That's external, and so you can turn that, and this will switch to the next one. So wherever you had the settings set for this switch is where it will stay. So it can get confusing if you don't know that, so just keep in mind. The top switch is called external. That's going to take the audio input and it runs it through the filter. Next we have ring, and that will add a ring mod. So you can hear it. If I turn down this oscillator, you can hear what that's doing. So if I change, let's say, setting on here on oscillator 1, you can hear a lot of different sounds and make different tones by using that ring mod. I'm going to bring up the other oscillators. And the bottom one is just noise. So if I turn that up, we're just going to hear noise. Now we're going to look at the filter section. Right now it's in the regular filter mode. There's also an acid mode, which is like a ladder filter. Over here, the big knob here is the frequency. So if I turn this, you're going to hear the filter. And right now it is in 24 dB. There's also a 12 dB. Right now we're in low pass, which is cutting down the high end. Band pass, which goes through the whole bandwidth, kind of like this. And then high pass, which is pushing off the low end. And this knob here adds an overdrive to the filter. This is pre-filter overdrive. Don't really hear too much until we bring up the resonance. So the resonance emphasizes what we're changing here. You'll hear it right away. And then, so let's add some more distortion. It comes in. So this knob is mod envelope depth. And what that is going to do is run this through that mod envelope that we have here. So it can go to the positive or the negative. So let's turn up the resonance so we can really hear the changes. Bring down the cutoff a little, since we're using low pass. And over here we're looking at the arpeggiator. Now right here is the tempo, and if I turn this rhythm knob here, it's just going to run through different rhythms and patterns. So I'm going to pull this down. Let's add some more notes. Right here is the mode. Right now it's up, so it will go cycle upwards from the notes that you have held down. If I go to the other one, it's going to reverse that and go down. So it's going to cycle the notes you're holding down. Now we have up and down. What that does is it goes cycles up and then goes back down, and vice versa. And this is a different version of that. It plays the first 9 notes twice. And then we have played, which just plays it in the order that you play it. If we have random here, it'll just cycle through randomly through the notes you have held down. Next we have play and record. If we want to go into record mode, we'll see the steps here, okay? And if we're in on this knob here, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. If it's set to 1, it's going to save to memory 1. That's the way you can look at this. There's only 4 settings you can record onto here. So you can either press a note, and then it will record it and go to the next step. If you want it to rest a note, you just press this button here, it'll rest. And then it'll go to the next step. Now I'm just going to press some other keys. Okay, let's say I'm done. Just go into play mode. Depending on what note we press, it takes that pattern we created and it brings it to wherever the root note that you play in. Now, when we're not in this mode and we're, say, in an arpeggio mode, this will turn into octaves. So in other words, if I press this and then turn it up to 2 octaves, it's going to play like this. And then etc. 3 and 4. Right here is the glide time, so if you turn this up, it's going to add a glide if you're changing notes. On the effects, we have distortion. This is the distortion. This will come after the filter. And then over here we have oscillator filter mod. What this does is it takes the oscillator and it runs it through the filter. So it's a kind of a strange, almost feels like cross mod effect.